I want everything. The house, the car, even the savings. The words struck me like a thunderbolt. My own father, the man who once carried me on his shoulders when I was little, was now standing across the courtroom, demanding every last piece of my life. He wasn't just fighting for property. He was trying to erase me completely. The judge's gavel cracked against the wood like a gunshot, calling the room to order. But inside me, there was no order left. My chest tightened. My stomach churned. I could feel the eyes of strangers drilling into me. Lawyers, clerks, even the curious few who had slipped into the back row to watch the drama unfold. To them, it was just another case. But to me, it was everything. I never imagined my life would come to this moment. You grow up thinking your parents are supposed to protect you, guide you, and stand by your side. But here I was, staring at a man who shared my blood, realizing he saw me not as his child, but as an obstacle standing between him and the money he thought he deserved. I glanced at him across the room. His face was hard, jaw clenched, lips curled with that familiar smirk I knew too well. It was the same expression he wore when he wanted to show dominance, when he wanted me to know I had no power. And even now, years later, he still looked at me like I was a child who should bow down, but I wasn't a child anymore. The courtroom itself felt suffocating. The high ceilings, the polished wooden benches, the flags flanking the judge's seat. It all seemed larger than life. My palms were slick with sweat, my heart hammering so loudly. I was sure the people beside me could hear it, every shuffle of papers, every cough, every whisper, echoed in my ears like an alarm. His lawyer spoke next, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Your Honor, my client simply wants what is rightfully his. After years of sacrifice, he deserves compensation. Compensation. That word burned in my chest. What sacrifice? The nights I cried myself to sleep because he wasn't there. The years he spent ignoring me, only to suddenly show up the moment there was something to take. No, he didn't deserve a thing. But how could I explain that to a judge who didn't live through it? How could I prove the manipulation, the coldness, the way he always saw me as a possession rather than a person? I swallowed hard, forcing my face to stay calm, even though inside, every nerve screamed in anger and fear. I wanted to stand up and shout, to tell the truth about who he really was. But I knew one wrong move could cost me everything. That's when I remembered the secret. The one thing he never wanted anyone else to know. A call sign, just a simple phrase, but one that carried years of weight. It was buried deep in my memory, tied to a childhood I had tried so hard to forget. A twisted game he used to play. A private language meant to control me, to make sure I always obeyed. And now it was my weapon. I sat straighter in my chair, steadying my breath. He thought he had already won. He thought the system, the lies, and his performance in court would be enough to strip me of everything I had left. But he had no idea I was holding a key that could unlock his true nature in front of everyone. My father demanded everything that day. The house my mother left, me, the car I worked to pay off, the savings that represented my future. He wanted to leave me with nothing but shame. But little did he know, one whispered phrase could unravel the empire of lies he had built. One secret call sign, just 2 small words, was enough to flip the entire case upside down. And I was ready to use it. My dad and I had never been close, not even in the way most distant fathers still try to show some warmth now and then. With him, it was different. He wasn't the kind of man who hugged you after a bad dream or cheered you on when you succeeded. Instead, he was strict, controlling, and sharp-tongued, always ready to remind me that whatever I did was not good enough. I remember as a kid, I used to wait by the window when he promised he'd come home early to play catch with me. Hours would pass, the sun would dip below the horizon, and I'd still be sitting there, clutching a baseball glove too big for my hand. He'd come home eventually, but not with a smile or an apology. Only excuses, or worse, silence. That silence, cut deeper than words ever could. When my parents divorced, I thought maybe things would get better. Maybe the distance would soften him. Or maybe he'd finally realize what he was losing. But instead, he disappeared completely. No calls, no birthday wishes, no how are you doing. He slipped out of my life as if I didn't matter at all. It was just me and my mom after that. And let me tell you, she was everything he wasn't. She worked 2 jobs, came home exhausted, yet still found the strength to smile at me. She believed in me when no one else did. She kept the house running, kept food on the table, and even when life was tough, she never let me feel unloved. Years later, when she passed away, it shattered me. Losing her felt like losing my anchor in the storm. Suddenly, the house we had lived in together, the walls filled with memories, and the small savings she left behind became more than just possessions. They were the last pieces of her love, her legacy, her proof that she had always been there for me. For a while, I thought that chapter of my life was closed. I thought I could grieve in peace, rebuild myself, and honor her memory by protecting what she left me. But I should have known better, because that's when he showed up. My dad, the man who had been gone for years, suddenly came back, not with flowers or condolences, not with apologies for the years of absence, but with a lawyer at his side and a stack of lawsuits in his hands. I'll never forget the first time I saw him again. I opened the door, expecting maybe a neighbor, maybe a delivery man, but there he was, standing on the porch in a suit that looked far too polished for the occasion. He didn't hug me. He didn't even say he was sorry for missing the funeral. His first words were, "We need to talk about the house. The house. My mom's house. My house." From that moment, everything shifted. He claimed it all. The property, the savings, even the car my mom had helped me buy before she passed. He said it all belonged to him, because technically, during the marriage, everything had been under his name at one point. He twisted the past, erasing all the years he hadn't been around, erasing the fact that my mom had worked herself to the bone just to keep that roof over our heads. I tried reasoning with him. I told him this wasn't just about money, that it was about respect, about honoring what Mom had left for me, but he didn't care. To him, it was all business. And in his eyes, I was nothing more than an obstacle, standing between him and what he believed was rightfully his. And then came the words that cut deeper than any of his silence ever had. "You're just a kid trying to steal from me." A kid. That's all I was to him. Not his child, not his family, just some kid in his way. That was the moment I knew this wasn't going to be a family matter. This was war. He wasn't coming back into my life to reconnect or make things right. He had returned for one reason, and one reason only: to take everything he could, no matter the cost. What he didn't realize was that in doing so, he awakened a part of me that was stronger than he remembered. He thought I would fold under the pressure, that I would hand everything over just to avoid a fight, but he had no idea what I was capable of. Because while he was gone all those years, I wasn't just waiting by the window anymore. I was learning, growing, and becoming someone who could stand up to him. And though he believed the past was buried, I still carried one thing he'd never escape. Our secret, the call sign, the twisted little game he thought I'd forgotten, and when the time was right, that secret would come back to haunt him. The courtroom felt less like a place of justice and more like a battlefield where every word was a weapon. The air was thick, heavy with tension, the kind that made your skin crawl. I could hear the faint shuffle of papers, the tapping of a pen, the cough of someone in the back row. But all of it blurred behind the storm, brewing inside me. My dad's lawyer stood tall and smug, as though the outcome was already written. He paced in front of the judge, his words sharp and cutting. "Your Honor," he said in a voice laced with false sincerity, "this young man is ungrateful, irresponsible, and incapable of managing something as valuable as a home or savings. My client, his father, is only trying to protect what's his and make sure it doesn't go to waste." Each word stabbed at me, each accusation heavier than the last. Ungrateful, irresponsible, the irony burned. The man who had abandoned me was now painting me as the villain in front of strangers who had never walked in my shoes. I sat there in silence, my fists clenched under the table, my knuckles white. The urge to jump up and shout the truth was almost unbearable, but I knew better. In court, emotions can be twisted into weakness, so I held back, even as my heart hammered against my ribs like a drum. In my hands, I clutched the documents that proved everything: my mom's will, her handwritten note, the legal transfer of the house, and savings to me. They were more than just papers. They were proof that her final wishes were clear. Yet in that moment, as his lawyer's words filled the room, I felt as if even the truth wasn't enough. Then came the performance. My dad shifted in his chair, lowered his head, and let out a shaky sigh. A tissue appeared in his hand, and suddenly he was dabbing at his eyes, as though the weight of fatherhood had finally broken him. "Your Honor," he choked out, voice trembling in a way I had never once heard at home. "I sacrificed so much for my child. I worked long hours, gave up opportunities, and poured everything into raising him. And this is how I'm repaid, with disrespect and greed." The words echoed in the courtroom. A murmur rippled through the small audience seated in the back. Some even nodded sympathetically. My blood boiled. I wanted to scream, to tear apart his carefully crafted lies right there and then. But instead, I bit down so hard on the inside of my cheek, I tasted blood, because I realized something. He was playing a role. He was treating this courtroom like a stage, and everyone else in the room like an audience. He wasn't crying for me. He was crying for the verdict. The judge leaned forward, pen in hand, taking notes. I could feel the scales tipping, and for a terrifying moment, I wondered if his act might actually work. Could fake tears and hollow words really outweigh the years of silence, abandonment, and cruelty? That's when an idea began to form. As I looked at him, I remembered things only I could remember. His smirk when he demanded obedience, the strange little games he used to play, the secret call signs he forced me to memorize, punishing me if I forgot them. To everyone else, those games were invisible, but to me, they were scars. And suddenly, I realized I had something he couldn't fake, something he couldn't prepare for. The courtroom might have been his stage, but I was holding a script he didn't want anyone to read. I sat there, breathing slowly, letting the idea grow stronger with each passing second. My father thought he had the upper hand. He thought his lies and theatrics could bury the truth. But he had forgotten one thing. Secrets always have a way of resurfacing, and soon, I would make sure his did. When I was a kid, my father had strange ways of showing control. Some parents tested their children with spelling quizzes or math questions. Mine tested me with call signs. They weren't playful or fun. They were secret codes. little phrases he invented, and I was expected to memorize every single one. He made it sound like a game, but it was never a game to me. It was survival. For example, if he looked at me and said, "Blue Eagle," I had only a second to respond with "flying high." If I hesitated or forgot, his eyes would narrow, and punishment would follow. Sometimes it was yelling, sometimes grounding, and other times just the crushing silence that lasted for days. As a child, silence from a parent can feel worse than any shouted word. There were dozens of these codes. Random words strung together like Iron Wolf, where I had to reply, "Unbroken," or "Night Lantern," and my response was supposed to be "always lit." They didn't make sense, and I never understood why he created them. Looking back, I realize now they weren't about bonding at all. They were about control. He wanted proof that I was listening, proof that I feared him enough to obey instantly. And I did, because when you're a child, you don't question the rules. You just want to keep your parent happy, to avoid their anger. But deep down, even as a kid, I hated it. I hated the way my stomach would clench whenever he said one of those phrases. My mind racing to remember the right answer, so I wouldn't disappoint him, or worse, make him mad. Every wrong answer felt like failure. Every punishment reminded me that love wasn't unconditional with him. It had strings attached, hidden inside codes and obedience tests. After my parents divorced and he left, I thought I could forget those call signs. I thought time would erase them from my mind. Like old numbers, you stop dialing, but no matter how many years passed, the words stayed. They were carved into me, echoing whenever I heard something similar. Blue Eagle, flying high. I couldn't forget even if I tried. And now, sitting in court so many years later, those memories hit me like a tidal wave. My dad was on the stand, pretending to be a victim, weaving lies to win sympathy. Everyone else in the room saw a grieving, selfless man. But I saw the truth, the same manipulator from my childhood. That's when it clicked. Nobody else in that courtroom knew about the call signs. Not the judge, not the lawyers, not the spectators. Only me and him. Those codes were our dark little secret, one he never imagined would come back to haunt him. And I realized something powerful. If I used them here, in front of everyone, I could expose him. Not with accusations or shouting, but with the truth he'd buried in me since childhood. Because I knew my father. I knew how much he hated losing control. How much he despised when secrets leaked out. His whole life was about keeping up appearances, about being respected. If the court discovered he had once treated his own child like a soldier taking orders, forcing me into twisted obedience games, it would shatter the image he was working so hard to build. The thought sent a chill down my spine. It was risky. What if the judge thought I was exaggerating? What if my dad twisted it again? Made me look crazy. For a moment, doubt gnawed at me. But then I looked at him. The way he smirked whenever he thought he'd convinced someone. The way he sat there, so sure he would win. And my fear melted into determination. He had used those codes to control me as a child. But now, as an adult, I could turn them into my weapon. The same words that once made me feel powerless could finally give me power. And in that courtroom, with the judge watching closely, and my dad clinging to his lies, I knew exactly what I had to do. The air in the courtroom had grown unbearably heavy. The back and forth arguments had dragged on for hours, and I could see the judge's patience thinning. He leaned forward slightly, pen poised, the kind of movement that signaled he was close to making a decision. My heart pounded in my chest. Across the room, my father sat tall, his shoulders squared, his lips curling into a smug little smirk. He looked like a man who had already won, like someone who was just waiting for the gavel to confirm his victory. His lawyer had done his job, spinning tales and painting me as ungrateful. And to the untrained eye, my father's performance as the selfless parent looked flawless. But I knew better. I could almost hear the echo of my mom's voice in my head, reminding me to stay calm, to never let him see me break. And so, instead of panicking, I stood. My chair scraped against the polished floor, the sound sharp enough to make heads turn. My palms were damp, but my voice came out steady. "Your Honor," I said, looking directly at the judge. "I just want to say something directly to my father." A hush fell over the room. Even the clerk stopped typing. The judge raised an eyebrow, considering me for a moment. Then he gave a single nod. "Proceed, but make it brief." I walked slowly, each step deliberate, as though I were carrying the weight of my entire life with me. My father's smirk widened, as if he thought I was walking over to beg, to finally surrender. He had no idea what was coming. I stopped beside him. The smell of his cologne hit me, a scent from my childhood, one that once filled the house late at night when he came home angry. For a second, the memories almost drowned me, but I shook them off and leaned closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. 2 simple words slipped from my lips: Blue Eagle. The change was instant. His smirk vanished. His body stiffened. And for the first time all day, he looked completely unprepared. His eyes widened, darting to mine as if to confirm what he'd just heard. He knew exactly what it meant. Those 2 words carried decades of weight. They dragged him back to the nights when he forced me to respond to his secret codes. They brought back the punishments, the cold silence, the sick satisfaction he got from making me prove my loyalty through nonsense phrases. To the rest of the courtroom, it was meaningless. But to him, it was a crack in his armor, and I saw it. The confidence that had carried him through this entire case cracked like glass under pressure. He tried to compose himself, but the tremor in his hands gave him away. His lips pressed into a thin line, his face pale beneath the courtroom lights. It was like I had reminded him of a secret he'd spent years burying, a truth he couldn't afford for anyone else to know. I straightened up, my own fear replaced with a quiet strength. For the first time, I wasn't the one under his control. He was under mine. The judge tilted his head, noticing the shift in the room. "Is there something we should be made aware of?" he asked, eyes flicking from my father to me. My father opened his mouth, but no words came out, just a stammer, a broken sound, the kind of weakness I had never seen in him before. And in that silence, everyone in the courtroom felt it. The power had shifted. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to argue. All it took was a whisper, 2 words, spoken softly, that reminded him of the ugly truth he thought no one else would ever hear. For years, those call signs had been his weapon to control me. But now, in front of the judge, the lawyers, and the strangers, watching from the benches, they became mine. And in that moment, I knew I had just turned the entire case upside down. The shift in the courtroom was immediate, like a sudden gust of wind, knocking everything off balance. 1 second, my father was smug and composed, and the next, he looked like a man caught in headlights. The judge's sharp eyes caught it instantly. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk, as though he had just uncovered a new thread to pull. My father's lawyer, who had been confidently flipping through notes moments earlier, froze mid-motion, his brow furrowing in confusion. He looked at my father, as if silently asking, "What just happened?" My father's hands began to tremble. He gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, as though holding on would keep the truth from spilling out. But it was too late. His carefully built performance The grieving parent, the man full of sacrifice, was cracking in front of everyone. He tried to speak, but the words came out broken. I don't know what he's talking about. This is nonsense. Just nonsense. His voice wavered, thin and unconvincing. That was my moment. I straightened my back, took a deep breath, and let my voice cut through the silence like a blade. Your Honor, I said clearly. What I whispered was one of many call signs my father forced me to memorize as a child. If I got them wrong, I was punished. The room grew still. You could hear the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights above, the soft scratch of someone shifting in their seat. All eyes were on me. I continued, steady and unshaken. These weren't games. They weren't lessons. They were tools of control. Words he made up to test me, to remind me that he was in charge, that I could never relax. And if I slipped, if I forgot even one, the punishment was immediate. My father shook his head violently, his voice cracking. That's not true. He's twisting things, Your Honor. He's exaggerating. Kids make up games all the time. He's lying to make me look bad. But his words rang hollow, desperate. His lawyer's pale face told the truth. He hadn't prepared for this. He didn't know about the call signs. He didn't know that beneath his client's polished image was something darker, something no lawyer could spin into innocence. I looked directly at the judge, refusing to break eye contact. My father manipulated me then, and he's trying to manipulate this court now. He's not here for justice. He's here to take what isn't his. Just like he tried to take my sense of self when I was a kid. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the spectators in the back seemed frozen. Caught in the gravity of the moment, my father's lips moved, but no words came out. His face had gone pale, his usual confidence replaced with something I had never seen in him before. Fear. He fumbled with the tissue he had used earlier for his fake tears, crumpling it in his hands, as though it could absorb the shame creeping over him. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but my father just shook his head, eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. The mask he wore so easily had shattered, and everyone could see what lay beneath. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to accuse him further. The truth was already alive in the air, undeniable and suffocating. My calm words had done what years of his control never allowed. I had silenced him. And in that silence, the entire courtroom seemed to realize the same thing. This wasn't just about property or money. This was about power, manipulation, and the damage of a father who never knew how to love without controlling. Even his lawyer sat back, defeated, his face pale as chalk. He knew it too. There was no recovering from this. For the first time in my life, the balance between me and my father had shifted. He was trembling, and I was steady. He was exposed, and I was finally free to speak. And that silence, that heavy, undeniable silence, was louder than any verdict yet to come. The silence after my words lingered like smoke, thick and unavoidable. Everyone's eyes darted between me and my father, waiting for what would come next. The judge leaned forward, his face calm but curious, the kind of expression that made it clear he wasn't going to let this slip by unnoticed. Explain, he said simply, his tone firm, commanding. Tell this court exactly what you mean. I swallowed hard, but my voice came out steady, stronger than I thought it could. Your Honor, my father's idea of parenting was never about love or guidance. It was about control. He created these secret call signs, phrases only he and I knew. They weren't games. They weren't lessons. They were tests. If I got them wrong, I was punished. If I hesitated, I was punished. I grew up learning that affection was conditional, that I had to prove myself worthy of it by following his secret rules. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the courtroom. The judge tapped his pen against the desk, his eyes fixed on me, listening intently. Behind me, I could hear a faint murmur ripple through the spectators. They weren't just hearing my story, they were feeling it. And now, I continued, he's here doing the same thing. This isn't about fairness or justice. He's not here because he cares about me. He's here because he wants money. He's trying to manipulate this court the way he manipulated me my entire childhood. At that moment, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small worn notebook. Its pages were yellowed, the corners bent from years of being shoved into drawers and boxes. I held it up so the judge could see. This, I said firmly, is my proof. As a child, I started writing the call signs down because I was so terrified of forgetting them. I was scared of the punishments. Page after page, I recorded every strange phrase he forced me to memorize. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to in order to survive under his roof. I handed it to the bailiff, who carried it up to the judge. The courtroom was silent, except for the soft shuffle of footsteps. When the judge opened the notebook, his brow furrowed. He flipped through pages filled with childish handwriting. Blue eagle, flying high. Iron wolf, unbroken. Night, lantern, always lit. The ink was faded, but the fear behind each word was still alive. My father's face turned red. He lurched forward in his seat, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He's lying," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "That's fake. He's making it all up to turn you against me." But the judge didn't even look at him. Instead, his eyes stayed fixed on the notebook, then flicked back to me. My calmness contrasted sharply with my father's unraveling composure. "Enough." The judge finally barked, slamming his gavel once. The sound echoed like thunder. My father flinched, his protest dying in his throat. In that moment, I realized something profound. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the scared kid sitting in silence, terrified of punishment. I wasn't shrinking under his authority. I was standing tall, holding the truth in my hands, while he scrambled to cover his lies. The power had shifted. Every shout, every outburst from him only made him look more unstable, more like the manipulator I had described. The more he tried to deny it, the more obvious it became that he had something to hide. And as I sat back down, my heart still racing, I felt a strength I had never felt before. I was no longer the child obeying his rules. I was the one setting the terms now. The truth was finally out in the open, and for once, he had no control over it. The courtroom held its breath as the judge returned from recess. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes carried the weight of everything he had just reviewed: the testimony, the notebook, and the outburst that had exposed my father for who he truly was. I clenched my hands together, bracing myself for whatever was about to come. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, but absolute. After reviewing the evidence and the testimony presented, the judge began. "It is clear to this court that the property and savings in question were legally and rightfully left to the respondent by his late mother. The claims presented by the petitioner hold no merit. Therefore, the inheritance shall remain with the respondent." Case dismissed. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My chest suddenly lighter. Relief flooded through me like a wave. And for the first time in months, I felt safe. Safe from the looming threat of losing everything my mum had worked so hard to protect for me. Across the aisle, my father's face twisted with rage and disbelief. He stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. "This isn't over," he barked, his voice raw and desperate. But the judge was already leaving the bench, uninterested in his theatrics. The spectators in the courtroom whispered among themselves, their eyes darting to my father with a mix of curiosity and judgment. He stormed out, his lawyer trailing behind him, looking pale and defeated. In that moment, the man who once seemed larger than life to me, the man who had dictated my every move as a child, looked small, smaller than I had ever seen him, humiliated, exposed, powerless, and all it had taken was 2 words, Blue Eagle. I sat there for a few seconds longer, letting it sink in. The inheritance was safe. The house I had grown up in, the savings my mom had left to ensure I could live without fear, they were all still mine. But the real victory wasn't just about the money or the property. The real victory was reclaiming myself. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt like the chains I had carried since childhood had finally shattered. For years, my father's control had been like a shadow over my life. Even when he wasn't there physically, his voice echoed in my head. Cold, commanding, impossible to ignore. But now the echo was gone. I understood something profound that day. Control only lasts as long as you allow it. My father had thrived on my fear, my silence, and my obedience. But the moment I chose to speak, to expose him, his power crumbled. He couldn't manipulate the truth. He couldn't rewrite the past. By whispering those 2 words, I reminded him, and everyone else, that the games he played had consequences, that the pain he inflicted wasn't forgotten, and most importantly, that I was no longer the scared little kid bending under his rules. He walked out of that courtroom empty-handed. No house, no savings, no control, and though he would never admit it, I knew that was the deepest wound of all. For a man like him, control was everything. Without it, he was nothing. As I stepped outside, the sun hit my face. The air felt fresher, the world brighter, as though I was experiencing freedom. For the first time, not just financial freedom, but emotional freedom. The kind that comes from breaking free of someone else's grip on your life. That day, I learned something I'll carry with me forever. Sometimes, the people closest to you can become your greatest enemies. But enemies only win when you let them. The moment you stand up, the moment you decide their power doesn't define you anymore, that's when you truly break free. I didn't just win a legal battle that day. I won back myself, and as I walked away from the courthouse, I wasn't just leaving behind my father's lawsuits or his manipulations. I was leaving behind years of fear, years of silence, years of being under his control. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was free.